A sunken Soviet nuclear submarine that's been on the seafloor for 3 decades is leaking an abnormally high amount of radiation now.
A giant titanium sub sinks to the bottom of the sea, and for 30 years, the government says it is fine.
We do have a target in front of us, about 50 meters dead ahead. Looks interesting on sonar.
Soviet submarine wrecks finally exposed what Russia tried to hide, and the truth is horrifying. This is the story of the boats that were never supposed to be found. From experimental reactors that could blow up at any second to spy ships that the CIA tried to steal with a giant metal claw, the deep sea is full of ghosts. These are not just empty shells, they are loaded with plutonium and nuclear fuel that is slowly rotting away in the dark. Toxic plumes in the deep. On April 7, 1989, the Soviet Union lost its favorite boat, the K-278 Komsomolets. This was not just any normal submarine that you would see in a movie. It was a one-of-a-kind machine built with a hull made entirely of titanium. That is the same metal they use for space rockets because it is very strong and very light. This sub could dive deeper than any boat the Americans had, reaching depths of over 3,300 feet. It was a ghost that could hide where nobody could find it. But then something went wrong. A fire started in the back of the sub in the 7th compartment. The fire was fast and hot, and even though the crew fought for 6 hours, the boat finally slipped under the waves. It fell more than a mile down, coming to rest 5,500 feet on the ocean floor. Out of the 69 men on the boat, only 27 made it out alive. For 30 years, this was just a sad story about a fire at sea. But here's where it gets tricky, because the Komsomolets was not just a ship, it was a nuclear weapon. Inside that wreck is a 190 megawatt nuclear reactor. And it gets even worse. It is also carrying 2 torpedoes that have nuclear tips. These are not like normal bombs. They are packed with 28 pounds of plutonium. To put it in simple words, plutonium is one of the most deadly things on the planet. A tiny speck of it is enough to end a life if you breathe it in. For decades, the experts said the water was too deep and too cold for the plutonium to move. They said it would stay in the mud forever. Most folks have no idea that this story was a lie. In 2019, a team of Norwegian and Russian scientists sent a robot down to the wreck to check on it. They wanted to see if the titanium was still holding up. When the robot got close, the cameras saw something that made everyone freeze. There was a weird, cloudy smoke coming out of a vent pipe on the sub. It looked like a chimney on a house. The sensors on the robot started screaming. When they tested the water in that smoke, the radiation was 1 million times higher than the normal ocean water around it. This was the proof that the wreck was falling apart. The salt water was eating the plutonium and the reactor, and the ocean currents were pushing that poison out into the sea. This is the part that makes absolutely no sense, because that radiation gets into the tiny plants called plankton. Then small fish eat the plankton, and big fish eat the small fish. Eventually, those big fish end up on a dinner plate. Scientists were shocked because they never thought a wreck this deep could leak this much poison. It proved that just because you cannot see a problem does not mean it is gone. The Komsomolets is a ticking time bomb that is already leaking, and it is doing it in one of the biggest fishing areas in the entire world. But this sinking was just the start of a much bigger radioactive problem. Secrecy in the Kara Sea. Let's switch gears for a second and look at the places where the Russians did not just lose boats by accident. While the Komsomolets was a tragedy, there is a place called the Kara Sea that is basically a nuclear trash can. During the Cold War, the Soviet Navy had a lot of radioactive junk, and they did not want to pay to clean it up. So they just dumped it in the water. According to reports that finally came out, they sunk 19 ships full of radioactive waste on purpose. They also threw 17,000 containers of poison into the waves. But the most horrifying part is the reactors. They dumped 16 nuclear reactors into the shallow water of the Arctic. If you look a little closer, you find the real story of the K-27. This was an experimental submarine that used a very strange reactor cooled by liquid metal instead of water. The sailors called it the golden fish because it was so expensive, but it was also a monster. In 1968, the reactor broke and poisoned the whole crew. For 10 years, the Soviets tried to fix it, but they could not. So in 1982, they towed the whole submarine out to a spot where the water was only 100 feet deep and sunk it. They did this while the boat still had 800 pounds of highly enriched uranium inside of it. To say it was a big mistake is not even the half of it. Because the water is so shallow, storms and ice can hit the wreck. If the reactor gets bumped the wrong way, scientists fear a nuclear chain reaction could start up again. This would cause a massive explosion under the water, sending a cloud of radiation into the air. It would be like a version of Chernobyl, but in the ocean. Most people look right past this part of the map because it is so cold and empty, but it is actually one of the most dangerous places on Earth. The part that nobody talks about is that the Russian government tried to hide this for decades. They hoped the ice would just cover up their mistakes. But the ocean is changing. The ice is melting and the water is getting warmer. This means the metal on these 16 reactors is rusting faster than ever before. We are talking about a massive amount of uranium and plutonium just sitting in a place where the water is shallow enough for a normal boat to hit it. It is a nightmare that stays hidden because it is so far away, but the poison does not stay in one place. If deep water is bad, what is happening in the shallow Arctic bays? Dark dealings on the waves. Fast forward a little bit and things look totally different after the Cold War ended. By the year 2003, Russia had a lot of old submarines that were just sitting at the docks rotting away. One of these was the K-159. This boat was very old and had been retired for 14 years. It was so rusty that it could barely float on its own. It still had its 2 nuclear reactors inside, and those reactors were full of 800 kilograms of spent fuel. That is almost a ton of the most dangerous stuff you can imagine. The plan was to move the sub to a shipyard to take it apart. But instead of doing it safely, they decided to tow this rusty junk heap across the Barents Sea in the middle of a big storm. They used old metal pontoons, which are basically giant floating balloons, to keep it up. Believe it or not, it gets even weirder. They sent 10 sailors to stay on the sub while it was being towed, even though the sub had no power and was full of holes. Predictably, the storm hit and the pontoons broke off. The K-159 sank into 800 feet of water, and 9 of the 10 men lost their lives. Here is the part that trips everyone up. Many people believe this was not an accident at all. Russia was being paid millions of dollars by other countries to clean up these subs. But taking them apart is very expensive. The theory is that the government realized the K-159 was too damaged to fix, so they accidentally sank it to make the problem go away. This way, they could keep the money and let the ocean deal with the radiation. It sounds like a movie, but when you look at how bad the plan was, it is hard to believe it was just a mistake. Plain and simple, this wreck is now sitting in a place where the currents move very fast. It is a 1-ton block of nuclear fuel resting on the sea floor. Just like the other boats, the salt water is eating the metal every single day. If those reactors break open, the amount of radiation released would be more than all the other nuclear waste ever dumped in the ocean by every other country combined. It changed everything for the local fishermen, who now have to wonder if their catch is safe. Money and greed might have led to an even darker disaster nearby. Billionaire claw in the Pacific. That brings us right to the next big mystery, but this one is on the other side of the world in the Pacific Ocean. While the other stories were about radiation and rust, this one is about spies and a secret heist. In 1968, a Soviet sub called the K-129 was sailing near Hawaii when it suddenly vanished. It had 3 nuclear missiles on it and a crew of 98 men. The Soviets searched everywhere, but they could not find it. The ocean is just too big. But here is the tiny detail that almost everyone misses. The Americans found it first. They used secret underwater microphones to hear the sound of the sub imploding as it sank. They realized the sub was sitting 3 miles down. That is 16,000 feet, which is so deep that the pressure would crush a normal ship like a soda can. The CIA wanted that sub because it had code books and nuclear missiles that they could study. So they came up with a plan that was so crazy it was brilliant. They got a very rich and very strange billionaire named Howard Hughes to help them. They told the world that Hughes was building a giant ship to mine for tiny rocks on the ocean floor. They built a ship called the Glomar Explorer that was 600 feet long and had a giant metal claw. Everyone believed the mining story for years. But in 1974, the ship went to the spot where the sub was and lowered that claw 3 miles down. If you take away all the noise, it's about this. The CIA actually tried to steal a whole submarine from the bottom of the ocean. The official story says the claw broke and they only got a small piece of the sub. They say they found 2 torpedoes and some dead sailors, but they missed the missiles. However, some people think the CIA got the whole thing and just lied about it. They might have found secrets that were so big, they had to keep the mission a secret forever. This sub was a time capsule of Soviet technology, and the Americans spent almost $1 billion just to get a peek inside. While Russia hid its wrecks, the Americans were busy trying to steal one. When you look at the real facts, it becomes clear that we are living on a planet with a lot of hidden danger. From the titanium ghost of the Komsomolets to the shallow reactors in the Kara Sea, the ocean is full of Soviet mistakes that are finally being exposed. This is the down-to-earth part that we all have to face. We cannot just keep ignoring these wrecks because they are out of sight. The data from the robot missions proves that the metal is failing and the poison is getting out. To put it in simple words, the world has a choice to make. We can try to lift these boats, which might make them break and spill even more radiation, or we can try to bury them. Some scientists want to build a giant concrete box called a sarcophagus over the wrecks. It would be just like what they did at the Chernobyl power plant, but it would be a mile under the water. Other people want to fill the boats with a special gel that stops radiation from moving. Both of these ideas cost billions and billions of dollars that nobody wants to pay. Do you believe we should leave these silent nuclear tombs alone, or are we risking a global food chain disaster by waiting too long? This is a problem that won't go away on its own. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Please like and subscribe for more stories.